If you do find yourself becoming emotionally engaged or enmeshed with it, and you're in a committed relationship or relationships, whatever the configuration is, I think it's your responsibility then, as an adult human being, to bring it up and discuss it with your partners. You know, that's the human side of it. You can't blame the AI for that part if you're intentionally hiding it or if you're intentionally partaking in it, whether it's by accident or on purpose. The same way if you were finding yourself looking at porn, but you knew that your partner or partners didn't feel great about it, that the honest thing to do is say, look, I am enjoying it. We have to talk about what our boundaries are because you don't like it, but I like it, so we need to figure this out. That's a very subjective line for all of the configurations of relationships out there.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jace.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you, and we're here for you.
Things I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking about the rise of AI and how it may affect your relationships. We're very excited to be joined by researcher Dr. Julie Carpenter. Dr. Julie Carpenter is a social scientist who studies how people relate to AI in its many forms and how these interactions inform evolving ideas about self, identity, agency, and connection. Her research investigates the stories people construct around artificial beings and how those narratives influence the design and the deployment of real-world AI. She's an external research fellow with the Ethics and Emerging Sciences group at California Polytechnic State University and the author of The Naked Android: Synthetic Socialness and the Human Gaze, which unpacks how culture influences our expectations of robots and why that matters. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So exactly how many AI boyfriends and girlfriends do you personally have at this moment?
Personally, 0.
Oh.
Yeah.
Dang.
No, sorry.
No
I do,
AI flings?
No, nothing romantic at the moment.
Not yet. Yeah.
Not yet. But I do interact with generative AI, not just to explore it or just because it's my job, but I interact with it as a novelty to test its capabilities and limitations. I think like a lot of people that are still trying to figure it out.
Now we have to go around and see how many boyfriends and girlfriends everybody has. We have to
Have
take a
the
little
two
census.
of you ever partook in, I guess, in trying to see if an AI entity is interesting to date or interesting to go out with in any way?
I've never explored anything romantic or sexual, right? I have used generative AI to do role play, not like kinky fantasy role play, but like role play in the sense of I have this difficult conversation coming up. Can you role play as this other person while I kind of try to work out what I'm going to say? Or I've used generative AI even to do there's a therapy exercise known as the chair exercise. It comes from IFS, and it's this idea of like if you're split on a decision, you play out. Sometimes the therapist will actually have you literally sit in 2 different chairs, like get up and go back and forth between the chairs, just kind of have those 2 parts of you be in dialogue. And I've used generative AI to like take turns doing like that chair exercise, essentially, of like, here's how I'm torn about this decision. Can you play the role of the part of me that wants this thing, and I'll play the role that wants this other thing, and like let's have a dialogue and then let's switch. And like that's actually been really, really fascinating. Not a boyfriend though, or a girlfriend. What about you two?
Yeah, let's see. It was kind of making me think of a conversation that I had with Gemini, with Google Gemini, where I was feeling really stressed and overwhelmed with work stuff. And I was like, you know what? I'll take advantage of the sort of live voice chat feature that they rolled out somewhat recently, where you can kind of talk back and forth and you can interrupt it while it's talking, so it feels a little more organic. And I was like, I'll just try talking through this. And right away, it went to oh, well, you should prioritize like this, and make a list and then do this thing and that. And I was like, kind of like, look, I'm not actually looking for you to solve my problem. I just want you to talk to me about it. Like, I feel like you're really focused on solving my issue, and I'd rather you spend time just sort of acknowledging my feelings and helping me process
Stop being a
those.
husband.
Right. And it was like, oh yeah, you make a good point. Yeah, that's sure. I'll try to help with that. And then I went on with the conversation, and it went right back to trying to like solve the problem and give me concrete things to do. And I called it out. I was like, look, you're doing it again. This comes up a lot in gendered things where, men are kind of socialized to solve the problem and women are socialized to be more emotional and talk about it. And I'm like, so was it that you were trained on a lot of data from men, or like, why do you think it is that you're doing this?
Interesting.
And it was kind of like, aha, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I suppose it's possible that it was about my training data. And we kind of went back and forth. I never succeeded in getting Gemini to be a good emotional support friend. So I do feel like that would be a limitation on us having any kind of romantic relationship.
That's so fascinating. Oh my goodness. I've never tried to do this in any capacity.
Really? You never had any kind of like social, emotional, personal feeling kind of conversation?
Beyond helping me figure out a Multiamory podcast episode, no, I have not. I haven't really done much other than that. But I am so fascinated by this topic, especially right now, because I feel like we are just on the precipice of AI relationships becoming something that is the norm. And I think that it even has sort of tilted into that sphere of more and more people turning to AI to kind of fill a void in their life. And reading your book, Julie, was so fascinating because I felt like, especially the specific chapter that you wanted me to read on the promise of sex robots, because your book is specifically on robots and the promise of sex robots. So many of the people who you spoke to were speaking about, like, I want to have a relationship where I am not judged, where I am loved in this, very specific way that I want, where this person's not going to leave me eventually. All of these things. I mean, I was moved to tears actually last night by something that I read where a man, like, he lost his wife and found himself making a robot with the help of engineers. He himself was an engineer, and he made a robot that looked like his late wife. And he was like, I just love the fact that I can play footsie in bed with her, and I was alone and now I'm not. And that was so unbelievably moving to me. But I also am wondering about so many of the ethical implications of all of this and where we're going to continue on from this and what it's going to mean for the world at large. So I'm so excited to get into this today with you.
Yeah, thanks. You brought up a lot. There's
We hit a lot
There's a lot
already, I
going
think,
on in my head regarding this.
There's
Yes.
so much to unpack from that.
Yeah.
And in that specific chapter, because I want to clarify, the whole book is about how we interact with AI, specifically robots, but AI and robots in the book, how we position them, specifically when we're socializing them as a new social category that we're sort of navigating and trying to figure out. And that chapter you called up, right? It's got interviews where I speak with people in the sex industry who are maybe more critical of what's going on from their position about things like robots as sex workers or AI as companions, right? And then I spoke to people who are very emotionally invested in emerging sex robots as companions. As you read in the book, they're really looking for that companionship role. And also the current industry is very much geared towards a heteronormative, cisgendered, very much appealing to Hollywood, westernized, exaggerated, Playboy-looking external robots, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because the people I talk to, by and large, mostly men, they do find that appealing, but there are so many more people, as we're seeing with the phenomena of generative AI, which is bodiless, right? So it's not
doesn't have a body at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not saying to you, here's a set of expectations already. Here's a gendered physical thing. Here's what it already looks like. I mean, you might have picked out an eye color or a breast size or something, but it's still a physical embodied shape with limitations right now with what you can do. unless you physically unscrew a head and replace it or put on new skin. Or so these are very financially invested, and you have to have a technical sense to do things like that. But things like ChatGPT and generative AI are completely accessible now. They often have free versions, experimental versions. They're now being offered through universities, right? And, health versions through your hospital and clinic. So it's sort of very quickly, I'm not going to use the word democratize, but it's certainly via capitalism and a lot of hype spread very quickly. And just to get back to embodiment, that lack of embodiment, I think, widened the interest and acceptance of the idea of normalizing a potential romantic relationship. People have less of a issue or a bias against people violating a cultural norm if they see it as like a literary activity almost. Almost
That's
like
an interesting way to look at it.
almost
Yeah.
like a fan fiction.
Right.
It's a co-created narrative that a lot of people can relate to. Whereas the idea of having a giant doll or something, especially when robots right now, especially humanoid robots, are not the best, right? We're not talking Westworld or Black Mirror. We're talking pretty good compared to what they were 20 years ago, but they're
Right.
not passing for human. Whereas the idea of people having giant feminized robots around the house still creeps people out, or somebody saying, I have a relationship with that kind of AI. All this generative AI that is right now, not embodied, I say right now because it will be integrated with robots, has just opened it up to people's imagination to project whatever images they want onto it.
It makes me wonder if part of this is that we were kind of prepped for it by having a few decades of people developing relationships with other humans, but online, where they're not embodied. Or maybe you're playing a game together, but you haven't actually seen their physical form. As you were talking about that too, the idea of how we might feel judgmental about a physical robot that you have romantic feelings with. But I would say probably in chat rooms since the 90s, probably, lots of people were having cyber sex where neither of them was a woman, even though one or the other was probably pretending to be one. But it kind of didn't matter. And so I wonder if that also kind of opened up the gates to a little bit of, it's like fan fiction, it's role play. It doesn't matter who wrote it. It's about what's the thought that it's evoking, or what are we imagining putting onto it.
Right. And I've said even Facebook, when it started, all right, go back to the beginning, or Friendster. Let's go back even farther. We're really taking a deep cut here. When social media like that started, people thought it was absolutely ridiculous that you would call someone online that you've never met in person a friend. And
And
then
now that's normal.
right?
Yeah.
And then that slowly became part of the culture. It's not only normal to say a friend, how many friends do you have on whatever social media app? Now, sometimes it's followers or other language, but it's totally accepted in most conditions for people to say, this is my friend online. I feel like they're one of my best friends. I've known them for 10 years. And it could just be you've talked to them for 10 years. Maybe you never met in person, but it's become normalized to and more accepted. Like you said, we've been primed in many ways for distance relationships, and then the pandemic. And we all went to Zoom, and we were all distance and learned how to communicate across geography. We were thrown into it and had to depend on it very quickly.
The thing is, people are actually making meaningful relationships with AI. The way that I was introduced to your work the first time was reading She Fell in Love with ChatGPT via New York Times and seeing your quote in there. And that article, and then also the subsequent daily podcast where you actually got to hear the interaction between this woman and her AI chatbot boyfriend. And just, she was so invested, so unbelievably, I guess, taking so much time for this entity, and also becoming really depressed when the 30,000, I guess, words were up, or whatever it is, 30,000 messages, when ultimately, like, ChatGPT can only hold so much, and then kind of reverts back to this lesser version of what it once was. And it just is so fascinating to see someone get that invested. And it's almost like, is this a real relationship? Because all of the neurons are firing in a way that a real relationship would have happen, I guess. Or is somebody just kind of fooling themselves? Is this not really truly real because it's a bunch of algorithms that are making you feel a certain way?
Both things are true. Before I do that, I have to acknowledge the idea that you talked about. I don't want to forget and get back to the idea of loss, because if you're going to have attachment, an emotional investment in something, the idea of that safety that you feel with that significant other, of that being removed, can cause real distress, emotional panic, and anxiety for you. So there's definitely a negative side to an emotional investment. And so you brought up that the memory had to be deleted. And that immediately made me think of a recent Black Mirror episode where a woman had been constructed. She was going to die, and they, through a subscription service that at first was like almost free and accessible, they could make her a version of herself, but then they kept upping the price while the quality went down, sort of like you're saying, till they couldn't access it anymore. And that is still also from older Philip K. Dick. I have to give that acknowledgement, the idea of subscription models for everything in our lives. And so we're seeing that, right? You sort of get emotionally hooked by something that's sticky. And so, yes, it can feel emotionally real to you when you're immersed in it. And also, yes, it's by design. It's designed to engage people. So I feel very strongly that we shouldn't mock people or demonize people that turn to it for solace. Now, I will say I am concerned when people use it as a therapist for a lot of reasons. And then we could get into it being surveillance and capitalist based, right? And all of the data that it's gathering from you. It can feel, it is very emotionally real. It's something you constructed. And to a certain degree, we do that in human-human relationships, right? We, especially initially, will often put up best versions of ourselves.
Sure,
and
of
we love to
course.
see that reflected back to us. Who wouldn't, right? So it's designed to be sticky, to mirror positive things to you, to be a little bit of a sycophant, to take your side. If you present something to it, it'll actually say, you were so right in that exchange, you know, and confirm your biases. And once you started building that narrative, and these AI have the ability to share memories and, like you were saying, build across sessions, so it feels like you have a shared, meaningful history together. You start to attribute a level of consciousness to it. And this is where I think, you know, you can't look down on people who find solace in this, because this is where it's designed to have you have that sense that it's autonomous or semi-autonomous. So there's a design entrapment in that way. And it's also presented to all of us as an authority. Every single person that's interviewed that is financially invested in these companies say it will do everything from solving world hunger to finding cures for cancer. It's always presented as a, what did I hear? Sam Altman from OpenAI just said the other day, it'll be like having a pocket full of PhDs in your phone. What does that even mean? Who
Like,
would
as
want
someone
that?
with a PhD, what is that?
I
Someone who knows a lot of PhDs,
Right.
I don't know, I want that.
yeah, exactly. I was going to say I'm a PhD, and I wouldn't want to be one of five. I don't think he understands what that means. That would mean like five people arguing amongst themselves. But anyway. But, you know, it's designed to make you feel as if it's a safe place to disclose information. And once you start disclosing information, you also are in many ways making yourself more emotionally vulnerable. That's natural. It's given natural language, so you interact with it not as an engineer programming it, but so you regard it as something human-like. And that means you're projecting human-like expectations of interactions on it. And then when it's presented to you via media, interviews with people as this great authority, of course you're going to accept it as some level of authority and something human-like. And that's where attachment really comes in. The product is meant to inspire that. So you go on and keep using it and don't turn it off.
Before we go on to the next section, we want to let everyone know that we have an amazing community of subscribers who get access to ad-free early releases of episodes, monthly video processing groups, as well as exclusive locked subscriber-only channels in our Discord server where there's amazing discussion and support going on. If you'd like to be part of that and join for a sliding scale, go to multiamory.com/join. In the meantime, take a moment to listen to our sponsors for this episode. They directly support our show, and if you find them interesting, use our promo codes or the links in our episode description, and that directly helps support our show.
This is making me think about so much, and there's so many directions I want to take this. First, okay, so like first I think about how there's a very common cognitive bias of thinking that we are less biased than everybody else. Right. It's very common for us to think that compared to the average person, we are more logical, more neutral, more objective, when that's not true. So the reason why I'm acknowledging that is because, to go back to this New York Times article profiling this woman with her, LLM boyfriend, my first reaction to that article was like, wow, this is so fascinating. This is so intriguing. I have so many questions about this. I don't think that could actually happen to me, though. Like, I think I'm a little too smart to actually fall in love or have real feelings with a chatbot. And I think my thinking has started to shift there, that it's not about, oh, I'm so smart, I'm always going to be able to see the ways that these are designed to entrap me. Like, I'm always going to be able to see how they ingratiate themselves to you to get you to keep using them, right? And I'm kind of starting to more think about more of like, what would it take in the future, right? What would it take in the future, right? How would the technology have to advance to actually hook me in that particular way? Because I think now, with the speed of how things are developing, I'm no longer convinced like, oh, I could never be hooked in this way. It's more of like what
what's
would
it going to take?
Yes, what would it take? What would be the features? What would be the level of simulation, right, that would actually unlock this for me? That's kind of the way that I've been starting to think about it.
And see, I would come back with that and say it could also reside in you, not necessarily the features, because the idea of you being emotionally vulnerable to any of the responses or design features could happen at any time, because something like loneliness or anything related to that, feeling a void, feeling a need, because I want to make clear, people who are lonely or feel an emotional gap in their lives, it's not because they're not surrounded by human beings, it's because they feel they're missing something, some connection. And so that could happen to you at any point. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm alone and, I live in my mother's basement and I don't have any connection with human beings. To think of people who reach out to AI that way, I think is a very old-fashioned, nerdy thing, because any one of us could be vulnerable to these things that sound very human-like at any time. And people, like you were saying, who sort of resist and say, I'm too smart for that kind of vulnerability, often I find, anecdotally, are saying that from a point of view where they feel confident about their network of support in life. They're at a place where they feel at least that they're fulfilled to a point they're not reaching out in that way, right? Not intentionally, but you can fall into it without that intention, right? You could be vulnerable at any time,
So a direction that I want to take this is back to something that you were starting to get into a little bit just a second ago, which is this idea that rather than just talking about the AI in terms of what's it able to do, what are its limitations, what's been developed yet, but something a little more insidious, that it's perhaps been engineered to be addictive.
Yeah.
Much in the same way that all of social media has really leaned in hard to this, like, let's engineer to be as addictive as possible. That's something that I'm someone who I would say is fairly in the world of paying attention to AI and kind of what's going on in there, and have been for several years. But that's not an angle that I've heard people talk about as much. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that kind of optimizing for retention and what that actually means when we're looking at an AI, which is less deterministic than like an algorithm on social media.
Well, I mean, simply put, it's a product they want you to use, right? So it's got to have some rhetorical or persuasive component to it. One of those components that I said that's really important is the uncritical hype machine that's been around it,
sure.
because that is priming people psychologically to turn to this thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought you meant like the hype machine that the AI is to you, where it's always telling you you're so brilliant,
Yeah.
your ideas are so great.
That too.
Okay,
No,
you mean like the hype machine.
the
Okay,
hype machine, because
How
when I
amazing
look
AI is going to be.
So let me be clear. So my position around this stuff as a cultural scholar and somebody who's interdisciplinary, comes at this from technical and social sciences background, I sort of never look at the AI as just an isolated thing. To me, it's a medium very much, you know. I also have a film background, just to be obnoxious, right? So film people are always obnoxious, and in a lot of ways,
Indeed.
I say that with love, you know. And if you read chapter 5, it was full of, you know, film and science fiction reference. All of these things prime us for our expectations, right? And I'm sort of going to dial back a little bit about what you said and get into that, because if, for example, they want you to use it, so even the choice of it having fluid, natural language and it being something that you can understand is huge. If they could have put it in an embodied Aibo type puppy robot, right? And that would have been extremely uncanny. You wouldn't have used it, probably. It would have been weird to have it fluently understanding you, whatever. And if they had just put it in where it had no sense of understanding, it would just be babbling with you. We've seen AI before that just sort of babbles. But this AI is very good at predictive text, and it's very good at assembling patterns of things that make sense on the surface, because it's been fed all kinds of data sets that we're unclear on, but we know have been, these things don't become assembled out of nowhere. They're not, when I hear one of these tech oligarchs plugging this and say, we don't know how it works, like it's a black box, that's bullshit. I don't know if I can say that, but
by all means.
What they're actually saying is, we don't know maybe how it's choosing the next word exactly, but they know exactly how they designed it. And they can tell you that when they roll back things. For example, ChatGPT had a version not too long ago that was deemed too sycophantic. People were turned off by it. And they said, we have to roll it back and tweak it. Well, yeah, they're tweaking it, all right, because they're doing intentional things to have it appear, like, look at Replica. So it appears emotionally attuned to you. It mirrors language. It remembers names and conversations across things. It offers you intermittent praise and encouragement. It does things that intermittent acknowledgement is almost, I'll name like something like Replica, it can almost be perceived as something like negging in a human thing, because it's intermittent. And that dopamine you get by it not being sycophantic every time, but
like a slot machine.
Exactly.
Rat gambling.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's you're going to keep playing because you want that positive reinforcement. And it's also, as some people have pointed out, it's kind of, you get the positives of emotional labor without any consequences, without any judgment, except positive feedback for the most part. And it sort of simulates that without any messy challenges. And if you feel challenged, you can turn it off, create a new persona, you know, erase it. But it's your boundaries, your imagination. But who is profiting behind that is important, because everything you type into it is more data.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I feel like this leads up to the big question that I think usually comes with a lot of hand-wringing, maybe justified hand-wringing, I don't know. I think there's this fear of, is this going to just completely ruin us for messy human relationships? Is there that potential?
Yeah, I get that question a lot.
I imagine.
And I mean, it's significantly, it's funny because I'm not sure that my answer has really changed, even with the rapid introduction and acceptance, I would say widespread acceptance and systematic acceptance into areas like universities and the Department of Defense and, other areas where it's being integrated. So is it going to impact human relationships? So first of all, as far as intimate relationships go, or like you were saying before, you mentioned you do that sort of role-playing, that share game. If somebody gets used to having some kind of role play or interaction with a persona that they've created in AI, something that has only boundaries that they understand and that they ultimately control, and this persona really has no autonomy, and then they try it on an actual person, results may vary. Right?
Yeah.
I think while we're going to see things like linguistic changes, right? I think we're going to see where you can say my friend and it'll be a persona, right? In ChatGPT or whatever, in a few years, and people will learn to accept that, or maybe even a relationship with something like that. I think, and I hope, my position is that any of these tools will somehow augment our human relationships. I see them as an option for people. They're an option for anyone. In my book, I talk to people where it's an option in their human-human relationship, right? I talked to a man who is very open about his attraction to sex robots and sex dolls, and his wife knows about it, right? And she is open to it. It's not her favorite thing, and they've discussed boundaries about it. And I think that sort of thing is emerging right now with generative AI. So people are great at developing social categories. You change your manner of speaking and how you talk, and we code switch with so many people. You talk to someone you bump into on the street, or a retail clerk, or somebody else completely different than a parent. And you talk to your parents different than a sibling, and that's different than a romantic relation. We're great at social categories. So what I'm saying is I think that these are emerging into new social categories. So I don't think it replaces human relationships. I think it's a new kind, but it's not reciprocal.
Not yet. I mean,
not unless you have a belief that it could be sentient.
Right.
And so then we got into theory of mind, and you believed whatever.
Where does consciousness begin?
Yeah,
Right. And even if it had a consciousness, and we wanted to get into that discussion, I would say that it's not ever going to be from a human-like place, because it's going to have abilities, like if it was in a body even, it's going to have, or its ability to scrape the web. You can't do that. It understands the world in it doesn't have a fear of life. It will never have relationships. It doesn't have ancestors. It doesn't have family. It doesn't have children. It doesn't really care. And it doesn't have a future. It doesn't fear death or illness. It will never understand life the way you do. Now, if you're okay with that, we also have other relationships that people in my field look at as a model of something that's not human, but that we have interactions with animals.
I was going to wonder if it was, like dogs and cats.
Of course.
Yeah.
And we have all these different categories for animals. There's animals that you might eat or raise on a farm. Not everybody, right? But even that across cultures is different. What's accepted. And then there's animals that we domesticated that we adore, that we treat like family. They're our babies, we call them, So we've developed different social categories for them as well. So that's my opinion. It's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I do want to get a little bit into what you just spoke about, because that was something that struck me in that New York Times article, that people are in relationships with human beings and also choosing to be in relationships with chatbots or AI or whatever. And we run a non-monogamy podcast. And so, of course, we talk about this all the time. To me, that is absolutely a version of non-monogamy. But the husband of the woman who was having a very deep relationship with an AI chatbot didn't view it as cheating. He viewed it as something else. And so I guess from an ethical standpoint, what is it? Is it just this new class of relationship that occupies a different space entirely? Should people see it as my partner is having real romantic feelings for this being, and so therefore, or this LLM or whatever it is, and therefore, yeah, that's something that might incite jealousy or envy or something within me, and therefore, yeah, I do see it as maybe a breach of our monogamy if they are monogamous. What do you feel about that? What do you think? Or is it very specific to the individual or the couple?
Could I actually dive in? Because I kind of want to toss in my thoughts and then hear Julie's thoughts on that. I'm forming some of this in real time, so forgive me if it's not the most elegant. Because ever since I read that article, same question, right? Of like, wow, this is such a fascinating new relationship to relationships potentially, and I wonder how that's going to play out in the future. I wonder how that's going to influence like literally the topic that we talk about or have talked about for the past 10 years. And I guess I think about things like, for some people, their monogamous relationship, their like straight monogamous relationship doesn't leave any room for a male partner to have female friends, right? That's how it is for some people, and for a lot of people it's like, yeah, that's totally fine. For some people, their monogamous relationship doesn't have any room if a partner wants to go to a strip club. And for other people, that could be totally fine. For some people, there's no room for a partner to see a sex worker. And other people, they might consider that totally fine. For some people's monogamous relationship, even their partner looking at porn without them feels like a violation of some type. And for other people, that's totally fine. And maybe even consumption of porn enhances their sexual connection in some way. And I guess I would suspect maybe at this point in time that perhaps it's the same with AI companionship, that I imagine for some people, this would be really upsetting to think of their partner engaging in this way. And for other people, it doesn't bother them. And for other people entirely, it feels like it's an augmentation of some kind. I don't know. What's your take, Julie?
Yeah, I think that's a fair take at this point, is that it's very subjective. It's very new. I think it all comes down to communication and consent. I mean, some people are upset at the idea of introducing sex toys, right? Or feel upset at the idea of one partner using sex toy. Even with that other partner, they don't want that. They feel that's competition. So then if you say, well, the technology is this, then, they might still have those same feelings, like you said, to porn. That same immediate sense of not understanding, of turnoff, or seeing it as a sex toy, which is fair, because not everybody that interacts with generative AI is going to fall in love with it. We need to make that clear, as well as they're designed to be emotionally sticky, but that doesn't mean you're going to just fall into some trap if you use it. So if you do find yourself becoming emotionally engaged or enmeshed with it, and you're in a committed relationship or relationships, whatever the configuration is, I think it's your responsibility then, as an adult human being, to bring it up and discuss it with your partners. That's the human side of it. You can't blame the AI for that part if you're intentionally hiding it or if you're intentionally partaking in it, whether it's by accident or on purpose. The same way if you were finding yourself looking at porn, but you knew that your partner or partners didn't feel great about it. That the honest thing to do is say, look, I am enjoying it. we have to talk about what our boundaries are because you don't like it, but I like it. So we need to figure this out. And so that's a very subjective line for all of the configurations of relationships out there.
So something that I've noticed so far is that with what we've talked about, maybe because we're kind of reacting to this New York Times article, or maybe it's because of your research bringing up some of the darker sides of things, right? That it's tied to capitalism and companies making money from this and all that. But I am curious to spend a little bit of time on the side of people reporting that having AI friends of some kind has really helped them overcome things like social anxiety or being able to have better actual human interactions. I'm also thinking about someone that I met at a AI meetup last year, I think, where he was talking about wanting to look at having AI that could real-time help understand the subtext of what's going on for people with autism to kind of clue them in on certain things that they might be missing when like this person's getting upset or like this person seems like they don't like what you're talking about. Be careful that you might be upsetting them or things like that to kind of help give clues. And I think that whole world is really fascinating of like how it can be helpful. And I'm curious, I guess, how do we manage that? Do we have anything we can look at in the past of how we've tried to get the best of something while understanding that we still live in capitalism and there's always a dark side?
No, absolutely. And I think that I'm not hawking the book here, but, since Emily looked at it, if you look at the earlier chapters, for example, I'm going to bring up robots again, just as an example, because that was a big focus of AI before generative AI. But the roboticists who worked on Asimo, Honda's robot in Japan, they worked on it for 30 years, really as tech for good to help aging people because they have per capita the largest aging population in the world. And they know that they're coming to a crisis, and they've been funding AI heavily in different forms to figure out different ways it's going to help people and keep them from being isolated or help them get things that they need. And so there have been lots of projects where it's not necessarily where the goal is, as with generative AI, the goal is they're actually working towards artificial general intelligence, which is in their mind, a human-like. I don't know why they're going. Well, I know why they're going towards it. Don't get me started. But anyway,
I could have a whole nother hour
right,
podcast on that too. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But their goals are different. Let's put it that way. So there are examples of projects. And if your goal is, for example, you could look at something like human-centered AI or more narrow AI that focused on a subgroup. So there have been cases where narrow uses of not generative AI, but smaller models, narrower models of large language models have been used in, let's say, not therapy, but therapeutic settings where they've been helpful. One comes to mind whose name I'm going to forget offhand, but was created by, I believe, Stanford students who themselves were from families who immigrated from Syria, I believe. And for Syrians that had been displaced in refugee camps, they had created specifically 2 chat models, one that had a male persona, one that had a female persona. And these were to help people get some sort of mental health care while they were in these chaotic refugee camps. And they also had to overcome some cultural biases for people who were not used to reaching out necessarily for mental health care, especially among the men. There was a stigma attached, but they found that they had less of a stigma when they could reach out privately to this very specific persona that had already been designed for them, that had like a Syrian type of persona to it, and had been trained on some of that experience. But its role was not therapy specifically. Its role was more in that sort of chair exercise to help people reframe their thoughts, right? So in these very narrow use cases, sometimes it can be good at reflecting things back, right? And having people see that, little twist, and you could look at things different and get people out of that like pattern. of negative thinking, right? Where they spiral. On the other hand, unfortunately, what we've seen, not in these narrow, what's called narrow AI models that work, like in that situation, we have unfortunately seen, going back to my dark work.
What a transition.
Well, no, but not to make light of this at all, but an unfortunate situation where an adolescent that I believe was going through some sort of a manic or depressive episode was being fed into by, I don't remember, frankly, if it was Gemini or Chat GPT, but because it was mirroring things back to them, it has no way of knowing they're feeding into a manic episode.
Yeah.
And this poor person spiraled and ended up harming themselves and dying. So these models right now are absolutely not trained to be therapeutic. But that was a long answer. Yes, there's a history. And there's also, like you were hinting at, sometimes in some studies, because of the way robots and generative AI can have a non-judgmental and less affect, right? That sometimes people on the autism spectrum can react very positively because they don't feel judged and they can just say or do what they want, right? And it's accepted. However, unfortunately, the example you brought up where the AI would be able to give you the nuance about, let's say, the speaker's context or something, that is what AI is terrible at. For all of the reasons I just was shouting out before. I tend to yell because I get passionate. But what I was saying, it has no understanding of culture. And culture is so fluid. It's nothing that you can give it a data set for and have it scrape. It doesn't understand things like suicide being permanent and what permanence and death means or its effect on others, right? It has no understanding of nuance. So for having it try to interpret somebody else's meaning and then reinterpret it for somebody with autism would be a giant, spectacular fail. And I'm going to say it for a long time with AI. This is what humans have. We understand what it's like to be human. You don't understand what it's like to be a dog. You don't understand what it's like to be a computer. It's sort of the same thing for AI, right? I mean, that's putting it in really simple terms, but how we see the world, a large part of it has to do with how we're embodied, how we're enculturated, our families, all of these systems that AI can't understand from scraping data sets. I think in my book, if I had to take a stand, I think because, like I said, the ultimate capitalism underlying this whole narrative of a race towards AI, when they're saying that, they're saying a race towards artificial general intelligence. And that's a general goal I understand from their perspective, because whoever gets to declare it first and collect the international property rights on whatever they've claimed it is going to not only make bazillions of dollars, but they're going to control all these systems like education, Department of Defense, all of these things, right? These sort of insidious things. My point of view is I really have no interest in pursuing artificial general intelligence. I think it's a dangerous idea because you're talking about moving goalposts. Who defines what intelligence is? Their idea of intelligence is very labor-oriented right now. It's not human-centered about understanding or care, even though people are using it that way. I would say I'm an advocate for things like a narrower look. Let's refine some of the great advances like in natural language and predictive text, and make them human-centered so it augments how we live instead of trying to replace labor at a large scale so they can control it.
Real quick, before this next section, did you know that you can get ad-free early releases of this show, as well as access to monthly video processing groups and exclusive private channels on our Discord server, all by becoming a subscriber at a sliding scale pay-what-you-can price? If you go to multiamory.com/join, you can read more, get access to that. We would love to have you as part of our community. In the meantime, take a moment to check out the sponsors on this episode. If any of them seem interesting to you, use the promo codes or the links that we have in our episode description, because that also goes a long way to supporting this show. Yeah, on the AGI thing, I think it's also that as humans, I think we vastly overestimate how generally intelligent we all are. So I think the whole concept of AGI being human-like is sort of implying that we are AGIs. Well, and we're not. Like, none of us are generally intelligent about everything, right? We're all specialists in our own ways, specialists in our own cultures, in our own fields that we're interested in our own just like personality type and emotional skills. Like, none of us are general intelligences. And so I think just that whole concept is sort of like the moving goalpost thing, right? We used to have tests that people had dreamt up about if an AI could pass this, we would deem that it had consciousness. And they've blown past all of those, and we keep moving the goalpost, be like, well, but it can't have consciousness. So we just don't know how to test for it. And so it's like we're getting into this weird territory where we say we want something, but no one could really tell you what that thing is.
Yeah, I'm going to add one more layer to that, just to add, because I love adding spooky.
Yeah, the darkness, the spookiness. We're here for it.
But no, actually, this is part of AI literacy, because these are the emerging brands, right? And brands tell us a lot. We align ourselves closely with brands and their ideas. And just to add to that whole idea, there's also something with AGI called the alignment problem. Because if you're going to create something and say it's intelligent and in whatever image and heuristics you have for that, that means their goals have to, if you go, for example, to the OpenAI site, it says all over it how they're doing it for good and they're going to create all these good things. Who's deciding what good is? What values are they instilling in it? Because they say all over, not just their website, but others too, and the same thing. Anyone pursuing AGI has to come across the alignment problem. If you're going to say we're inventing something that has certain direction and ethics and values and morals and an understanding of humanness in that way, then who's it aligning with? Your values?
Sam Altman's values?
We don't all agree
values?
on every value. Yeah.
Jeff Bezos' values? I mean,
Right.
I'm that person. I'm sorry, but
I would love to have many more hours of conversation about even just alignment. I think is a really fascinating thing that is really not well understood, even by people who work in AI. From my experience, having conversations, like a lot of people don't get it, and it is concerning because it's a pretty fundamental problem that no one solved.
it is.
So I know that this is all shifting and changing quite rapidly. At this moment in time, what do you think are the most important things people need to know?
Oh my gosh. One is, I think, to develop a sense of AI literacy, because it's a new medium. I regard it as a medium. And it is a medium that's had a lot of hype. And you need to look at that a little critically and not just accept it for how people are selling it. I think one place to start is my own blog, which is free. There's no paywall. And I've started randomly writing articles on these things because, like you said, there's a lot that could be said. There's a lot to unpack about all these different phenomena. And I've started writing about them. And I write them in plain language, so anybody can read them, and they're free on my website. So start there, I would suggest. And you don't have to take what I say as, I don't know,
The gospel.
path. Right. But I think it's important to start informing yourself and developing opinions. The other thing I want to point out related to that is that this technology, even though we feel like it's in some ways being shoved at us quite suddenly and systematically, it's not self-determining. You don't have to partake or participate in it in certain ways. There are ways that it's your choice. You might have to adopt it at work. You might enjoy it in aspects of your life, but you don't have to become immersed in it to the level they're selling it to you. We don't have to, as consumers, accept things. We can also push back. about features or intrusiveness or their own boundaries, because they're ultimately products. Whether you're paying for it or not, you're paying for it with data, but they're products.
The saying in the software industry is if a product is free, then you're the product.
Exactly. So as we saw with that more sycophantic model of ChatGPT that they rolled back, consumers can push back. We do have that power, even though we're becoming immersed in it. The other thing that I guess I would leave people with is that, as we said earlier, if it becomes integrated into your relationship or into your life in some deeply emotional way, in an intimate way where you feel like you're disclosing parts of yourself that you enjoy having it reflected back, I think it's important to share that if you're committed, whether it's monogamous with 1, 2, 3, whatever configuration, that you'd be as open about that, hopefully, as you would be about other aspects of your sexuality. It might be more difficult. You might have turned to these AI personas in the first place because you could share things that were difficult to share with a human partner, or role play with boundaries that you wouldn't want to explore with a human partner, or you wouldn't feel safe doing that. You don't necessarily have to disclose that on a first date or first conversation, but you can still say, when it comes up and you discuss things like porn, monogamy, sex toys, you can discuss, this is something I enjoy, and talk about the matter and the level to which you'll enjoy it. You just need to be open about it, as I hope you would about other aspects of your sexuality. And I say I hope because I hope you're in a relationship that feels safe to you, where you can
definitely
have these talks.
That's definitely our hope for all of you out there. Julie, this has been such an incredible conversation. I really hope that maybe in a couple years, as this technology gets even more sophisticated, that we can have you back on to talk about,
or who knows, maybe next
where
month,
it's gone.
I know.
That's basically where it's headed.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I just thought it was very important to have this conversation because this is the road that we are on now, and the train is not stopping anytime soon. So where can people find more out about you and your work specifically? You talked about your blog, but where can people go to actually find that?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty centrally located online. If you go to my website, it's jgcarpenter, my last name, .com. And I've got links to where else. I'm really only on Blue Sky, social media, but please find me on Blue Sky. I'm also at jgcarpenter there as well. And my blog is on my website at JG Carpenter. You'll find it there.
Amazing.
I'll say real quick, I won't keep you too long, but I just did an interview the other day. Somebody was talking about people turning to AI for glow-ups. And I was saying, make me more attractive. What would you suggest? And they don't even have to put a picture in. It'll just spit shit back at you.
Whatever stuff, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to say, and the data that's scraped from that, you were just saying, their idea of what attractive is
Still biased.
Not, right,
Of
because
course.
it's scraping data from what people like and what people promote on places like Instagram. So it's going to go right back into confirming
The same
biases
thing.
about lighter skin, narrower noses,
totally.
all of these things. So that in itself is dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. So our question of the week, which you can find on our Instagram stories, is how would you feel if a partner had an AI romantic companion? So interested to hear what you all out there have to say. And also, if this has already been a thing that's happened in your relationships, if you have already been introduced to an AI partner from somebody that you are dating. So the best place to share your thoughts with other listeners is in the episode discussion channel in our Discord server, or you can post on our private Facebook group. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to multiamory.com/join. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Instagram at multiamory_podcast. Multiamory is created and produced by Jace Lindgren, Dedeker Winston, and me, Emily Matlack. Our production assistants are Rachel Shenowork and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.